I'm here with Diana Cherry. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks so much for having me, Avi.
Diana is a writer, producer, activist, researcher. You are working on the Who We Are project, which is a documentary travel series that uncovers hidden histories of oppression, resistance, and resilience. Has a focus on examining the history of anti-Black racism in the US. And you are a former college administrator where you worked on building a safe zone and other DEI training and curricula. And your topic is truth, in parentheses, can be stranger and more impactful than fiction. Uh,
Yes.
I think the parentheses were intentionally put there. It's a subject that I'm very interested in. I've taught documentary courses before. I'm a big believer in the merging of nonfiction and fiction, so I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this. So I will start the timer. Uh, why did you choose this topic?
Yeah, I chose this topic because I feel like, it's not uncommon for me to talk with someone who's working through, we're all creatives and we're working with other people who are working through stories. And or I'm watching something in the media and I'm so curious about the challenge point, right? The place where someone is like, what is the what is kind of the shocking moment of this story, or what's the gotcha moment of this story, or how can I bring any kind of elevated approach to this story? And as someone who is deeply involved with the history of this country, who is spending a lot of time researching it, I'm really surprised how often, if you scratch just below the surface, something that actually happened in history is relevant to the story that someone's trying to tell and would be that moment, that shocking moment, that moment that draws people into, the intimacy and the empathy that they may need to have for a character or for a situation, whether, you're in docuseries land like I am, or whether you're in fiction. I really believe that mining that history is a huge source of inspiration and has so much value.
Yeah, I think history in general is I don't know about what your experience was, but for me it was not a very fun topic the way it was taught in public schools. And it's a shame because I was lucky enough to study like, take a couple courses in college, and it was just like completely blew my mind as to like how important history actually is when it's not just memorizing dates and names. It really is the thread uh, of to everything present, and to your topic, it's like the key to understanding the truth to almost any situation. um yeah, I clearly history is very important to you.
Yeah, no, I want to speak just for a moment to what you're saying about, how did I encounter history growing up? For sure, I feel the same way that you do. Like, I found it really boring when we learned about it in school. And I've since realized that one of the things, there was a certain perspective that was always the perspective that we were supposed to kind of think about through, like that was the lens that we learned history through. And as a biracial woman, like there were multiple ways where I didn't see myself represented in history. But I've since realized that I've always been interested in it. I was a kid who was often seen sitting really close by one of my grandparents and, peppering them with questions about their upbringing and about what it was like for them when they were growing up. And I think there's a lot of people like that, that they are curious about history in ways they don't consider the subject.
yeah, yeah. I can relate it from learning from my grandmother. Just history is I'm a Sephardic Jew, which is a lot of people don't even know that we exist. Like from North Africa, my family's from Morocco, and that like history was so ingrained in me that I guess I did have that real impactful message of history ingrained in me at a young age. I just did not get it from school.
Absolutely.
But so the idea of truth, when you say truth for your topic, you're thinking like sort of capital T truth, like the objective truth.
I think when I say truth, I mean actually the spectrum of truth. I mean, truth to me is not subjective, although each individual person can have the truth of their perspective, there's also facts, right? And so to me, truth is all of those things. It's, when we're writing about our personal experience, sharing how we experience something is an important part of how we write. And I mean that, right? So like that's part of what I mean. And then I also mean that when we step back and we look at the broader implications of the history around us, that we can't ignore that those are a part of the story that we're telling. I was really thinking about our conversation, and my kids are very into the Odyssey. And, they have so many different ways that they have entered into the storytelling of the Odyssey. And so my partner suggested that we watch Oh Brother, Where Art Thou this past weekend. And what really struck me is how black the story is. And it's told from the perspective of watching three white characters, right? So this story is about people who escaped the chain gang. Over 95% of people who are in the chain gang were black.
Yeah.
Then they go to this radio station where someone's blind and says they don't like colored people. And how much more impactful for the story would it be if they actually were,
Yeah.
black people? There's a scene where they have hoods on because they're trying to rescue their friend. Again, they're in blackface, but that scene would have been more impactful had they had actual black skin, right? And so I was so impacted by it that I went back and looked because I was convinced that they originally envisioned it as a black story because it as black history because it is just loaded with black history, but it's told in a whitewashed way. And to me, that would be, an example of something where the storytelling, I think, could have been stronger, although far be it for me to judge, an award-winning movie. I just think that like it's an example of how in our own retellings of something, we can bring our culture into it. We can bring our knowledge of our personal history into it and make those stories stronger. Um,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
No, 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 go, go.
I was going to say one example that I really love is, I grew up loving the book Little Women. I grew up talking about that book in my English classes. And, a central question of the book is why there's such a huge difference between the first section of the book and the second section of the book. They don't seem like they fit together. And Greta Gerwig answers that question by looking to the history and looking to Louisa May Alcott's life and recognizing that the life that she lived is a clue to what may have been going on in the book, which is pressure to perform a certain view of femininity. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think adaptation, I won't go like too far into that. Is I mean it's its own beast, but you know, as we study the classics, it's important to have the right people sort of making it relevant for newer generations. So that's a very good example. Um, but yeah, I think in like the your Oh Brother Who Art Thou example is, I mean, it's something that we should be talking about. And I mean, I think even the soundtrack too, it's like an all gospel soundtrack. If
It
I love the
is.
soundtrack, but you know, I think I'm hopeful that the democratization of just, where we're headed, hopefully there are more voices in the mix. And as soon as there are more voices in the mix, it gives the opportunity for people to tell more authentic stories. More
Absolutely.
storytellers, less stories, but more authentic stories, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Because I think that representation is an aspect of this, right? Because when we're thinking about story from outside of the story, like that's part of what I mean by truth. Like, because I do believe that all of us have areas like that in our own lives that we can learn from and think about that, are true to us and are authentic to us. Um, so I think anyone can do this. And you're right that when a certain story is told, asking, am I the right person to tell this story? And do I really understand the depths of what this story offers? I think, is also important. That made me think of a show that my family loves, Never Have I Ever. And I think it's a really good example where the show follows a young Indian girl and her experience in high school. but one of the things that I love about the show is how much of it's relatable if you grew up in a non-white household, like regardless of whether or not you're part of her particular culture. And I think it's just so much of it rings true because the writers had that experience. And I'm not saying that you have to have every experience you write about, but I think that starting from a place where you look at the experiences that you do have and recognizing how they might inspire you to go deeper in the story you're telling is important.
Yeah. Yeah. I should my wife is Indian, so I should know that show, but I don't. But we
It's like a teen show, so I know about it
okay.
because I have teens.
Okay.
Um, but it's actually a delightful and incredibly entertaining show for adults as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot of Indian American stories, but they're increasingly so. We
Yeah.
a lot of Bollywood plays in our house.
Yeah. Yeah.
But uh, so like, how do you? I mean, you work in documentary. Uh, do you also do fiction work? Do you?
I don't tend to go into the realm of fiction because that's another way that, the kind of the idea that I pitched you that truth is stranger than fiction
Yeah.
operates in my life. I feel like for me personally, hearing the stories of people who actually exist and their lives is incredibly rich to me, and it's just the area that I'm interested in. Um, and, I have dabbled in fiction in the past, not in any meaningful way, but I think it holds true in the things I most enjoy reading myself or watching myself. And so, yeah, for me, I think it's true. It allows you to play in a certain way when it comes to documentary work as well, right? To recognize that you really do get to go there with some storytelling that's like incredibly unbelievable because it's someone's real story. Um, Several years ago, I was like part of a book club where we read Garden of the Beasts by Eric Larsson. Other books of his are more famous, but this book is about like the rise of the Nazis in Germany. And at the end of the book, there's like this big reveal about an American diplomat's daughter um, being asked out on a date by Hitler, who's not Hitler at that point, right? And he talks about, or he talked about, and he came and like visited our book club, and he talked about how like he could never have written that if it was fiction because people would be like, "That's really hokey," you know,
Yeah.
like that's ridiculous. And I think there's a lot of things like that in history, which
Yeah.
is why I'm into it.
Yeah, I mean, there's two different directions I want to take this, but one is I want to like our first interaction was through these inspiration posts on Substack, and um, you wrote something that I thought was like very poignant about someone like just find your medium, I think was sort of like the message.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess I'm asking like, do you think in the quest to portray truth, to find truth, do you feel that film is the best medium, the right medium for you?
Sure. Yeah, love it.
Oh,
Yeah, so is it the best medium? I think that's a really individualized question. I think we have to find like what are our skills and bring those to the work. The thing that you're referencing is actually from a documentary about like this Japanese art form where they kind of ascribe elders with the task of like preserving certain histories that are important to them, like ancient art forms. And this person was actually um, the like he was the elder responsible for two different art forms, which is like unheard of, right? Because like that means that you have mastered both of these art forms in the eyes of Japan.
yeah.
And what he said was that all art comes from the same source, like it's only a difference of medium, and I'm paraphrasing big time, but that's what stuck with me at the time that I saw it. And um, I tend to agree with him. And so, for that reason, actually, film is a great medium for me because film allows you the opportunity. Like in my role in as a producer, like I am, in the space of getting to listen to the music that our composer composes, and I'm also getting to have these interactions with people, which is a big part of like the joy of the work that I get to do, but I also get to be a part of making decisions with the directors around like some of the visual elements and the storytelling, and there's a lot of writing in my work. And to me, that is, that is actually that makes sense when you're thinking about someone who thinks it doesn't matter the medium. Of course, it matters the medium. And also, there are so many ways to express yourself. And I think what's so beautiful about film is that there's many different art forms being displayed in one place.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the struggle is um, film is so powerful, and fiction storytelling is a very powerful, uh, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? It's been going on forever.
Yeah.
And those, you mix those two, and the thing that makes it difficult is like, how do you portray? Because I agree with you that truth is stranger than fiction, and more impactful. But like, how do you present that? Because on one end, if you look, like at a Ken Burns documentary, it's extremely informative, but it doesn't necessarily like really give you the impact of the strangeness and um, the specificities that like what you were bringing up about like that the example about Hitler. So like I think that's a struggle is that fiction is just storytelling is so inherently powerful. Um,
Mhm.
how do we portray the strangeness, I guess, is really to get at the heart of your topic. Um,
Yeah, I think that's an ongoing question. And I think it's a question that, again, I definitely don't want to pass the buck in answering this question, but I think it's really individualized. It's a question I'm always asking myself in my personal writing and professionally, like a question of how are we presenting people's dignity? How am I like expressing the truth of how I feel in this moment and what it means about a larger picture of like my relationship to the history and to my own family. Um, like those are questions that every individual project and then many different individual parts of that project,
yeah.
um, like have to confront, and we all confront them differently. And that's actually what I love about all art is that some of us will confront that in an incredibly serious way, and some of us will confront that in ways that are, that incorporate a lot of humor, and some of us will choose to just, share the facts of what happened in a particular way. And some of us will create these fantasy landscapes that are a metaphor for things that we're experiencing. And that's why I think like when you ask me what truth means to me, it means both things to me because when that comes from a really authentic place, I think the truth is part of that investigation. It's part of what makes something feel authentic to us when we see it.
Like as a collective, do we have a responsibility to label these things properly? Like, do you think that we should be talking more about like reality TV, or do you think that's sort of properly been genrefied? Uh, like there have been many movements in documentary filmmaking, like cinema verite, where there's like, should we put ourselves in the documentary? And yeah, I guess, how do you feel about like saying this is truth? How do you
Yeah,
earn that badge?
that is such a cool question, such an interesting question. And it's like every single one of
I
the
know
like
there's no great answer.
all of the like small little examples that you gave I think have their own answer. The fact like reality TV that you brought up, it's like, is that truth in the sense that what we're seeing is a casual organic moment? No. Does everyone who watches that know it? Actually also know, right?
Yeah.
I think that, so the Who We Are Project is a nonprofit and we do a lot of things. And so one of those things is this docuseries that we're working on. And one of the things that our founder Jeff would say, which I think is relevant here, is, his way of saying this is the truth is by pointing back to primary documents. Like this is what someone said. This is what they said their intent was. This is what then happened. This many people died. So in that way, I think like the truth in that context is facts. And if we're talking about how to make decisions that affect people's lives, like say in politics, that version of the truth, which is like just the facts, the facts laid out in a particular way, that's truth. If we're talking about fiction, I think we have to ask ourselves, I mean, if we care about presenting things in good faith and presenting things that are authentic, I think we have to ask ourselves questions about how we're presenting the characters that we present. Um, whether or not we're presenting them in ways that affirms aspects of our history or aspects of the truth, or whether we're presenting them in ways that stereotypes people or that puts us in positions of conflict that are that are nefarious. So it's such a huge, like that is such a huge question. But I think labeling something the truth, I would reserve for facts. And then beyond that, I think when we're asking ourselves that internal question with the work we do, it's more about, am I presenting work with integrity? Have I done enough work to understand the people and the characters that I'm representing and the worlds that they inhabit?
That's a very succinct, beautiful answer to a very difficult, complex question. And we only have 30 seconds left, but uh, I think that um, I've always thought that like historians have kind of like the most important role in our society, and documentary filmmakers are a form of
Hmm.
historians. And I think what it seems like you're doing with the Who We Are project, and one of the things that I think people are realizing more and more is sort of re-examining of history because of how it's not just been written, but like we were saying at the beginning of this conversation, taught in public schools, like with a certain bias. So to sort of wrap it up, I guess, where how do you think that truth is a never-ending process that should be constantly re-examined?
Absolutely. I do. I do. I think we should be re-examining it personally, and I think we should be asking ourselves, like, how are we confronting truth? Like when we are presented with information that challenges our worldview or challenges how we like to see ourselves, what are we doing to sift through that information with integrity? Um, Absolutely. I think, what we've been presented and what's available to us, those are different questions. So like even that, it's like, how can we look at what's available to us and seek out both facts and truth?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love this topic. I think this was a great conversation. Um, yeah, I think it's a difficult battle because you look at like a David Lynch film or something, and it's just oozing strange. Uh,
Hmm.
but the truth is, like, if we can convey truth in a way to show its strangeness, it's so much stranger.
Yeah,
It's so much more impactful. It really is. Um, but how do you do that when we have this obligation to like tell the facts as it is? Yeah, it's one of these like ongoing back and forth. I don't know that there's ever gonna be a perfect answer, but these conversations I think are some of the most important conversations to
I
be had,
totally,
not just
yeah,
for documentary filmmakers, but for fiction. Uh,
absolutely. And I think that wrestling questions that force us to wrestle with them, like for the rest of our lives, are worthy questions and ones that we should do the work to wrestle with. So
Absolutely. Well,
thank you so much for having me.
thank you for being here. You're doing the good work. Appreciate it. Thanks, Diana.